Good morning, Keller Williams. Happy Monday. And I know you are super excited because I am excited to have Jim West with us today as a guest. And Jim is one of our agents, and he's new to KW in Chattanooga, but he's absolutely not new to real estate. So, 45 years in the business, and some of the specialties that you have that we have discovered are, first of all, commercial, definitely creative financing, business acquisitions, and a great negotiator, just to name a few. So tell us just a little bit about you.
Well, I started out very young. Actually, I got a degree in music, which didn't really help me in my career, but I got into sales in 1979 because I really wasn't qualified to do much else. You don't really need to
Okay.
be experienced or qualified to be a straight commission salesperson. My first sales job was selling the predecessor of the cell phone, which in those days was commercial two-way radio. And my first year in sales in 1979, I think I made $20,000, which was pretty good money back then for
Right.
someone in their early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, well, you know what? I've got the sales thing kind of under control. I think I'll try something that's a little bit bigger ticket item. And I had a very good friend who owned a real estate company in Greenville, South Carolina. And he encouraged me to get my license, which I did in 1980. And I had been reading these books about real estate investment and creative financing. And back in those days, in the 80s, Jimmy Carter was the president. Our interest rates were over 20%. We really didn't have much choice but to be creative because financing was pretty much non-existent. And so right off the bat, I was appealed. I had drawn to commercial because the numbers were bigger, of course. And we had to be very creative in structuring transactions because the financing just wasn't available. And so I got heavily involved into real estate exchanging and selling apartment complexes and those kinds of properties. And it just got in my blood, and it went from there.
So you already had a natural knack for looking at all the pieces and finding ways that things could come together at a high level.
Yeah, well, being a musician, I think I had a mathematical and analytical mind.
Okay.
And so I can look at a transaction or look at a scenario and kind of see the outcome and what it should be and all the moving pieces. And kind of in my mind, I just kind of structure things and can see how it should fit together.
Well, I think as we were talking before we went live, the mindset around that and in that negotiator piece, you mentioned that you didn't take a class for that. You really learned that. You had to learn it, especially since you got into business in the years that you were in the business, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think, my first job in sales kind of helped me with that because whenever you're selling any product or service, you have to have both a motivated buyer and a motivated seller.
Right.
And, a seller of real estate is motivated for many different reasons. And they have a lot more flexibility than if you're just working for an employer and selling a product. You're given the price and you don't have much leeway to
Right.
structure anything different. But I found in those negotiations the most important thing is just to listen. Find out what the seller needs are, what the buyer's needs are, and then find out how to make small concessions along the way in order to get them to a point of an agreement. And that often can involve price, can involve terms. There's a balancing act between price and terms. For instance, if the seller is held on a price, the buyer is more likely to say, okay, I'll give you your price, but if you'll give me my terms. And if the seller is structured on all cash, the buyer might say, well, I'll give you your all cash, but the price is going to suffer, so therefore the terms are going to change. So another thing that I've learned that's very valuable, and this applies to commercial, residential, or pretty much anything that you sell, is that the final negotiating point needs to be in favor of the buyer.
Okay.
Okay, you want the buyer to be happy at the end of the day because he's the one that has the money, right? He who has the gold makes the rules. as they say, the golden rule of banking. And so even in selling a residential home, if the buyer moves in and he's got a bad taste in his mouth about how he felt he was taken advantage of or lost on the negotiations, he's not going to be very happy. And you want that buyer to be happy, to give you referrals and to tell about how wonderful you did in bringing the deal together. And so the agent can always win when they learn negotiation skills and find out how to make everybody happy.
So I think I like that strategy, and I think so many times in the industry, individuals get just hung up on let's just get the contract done, and then it's a marathon, like we're running fast. We just need to get it to the end and close, and everybody gets a gift.
Right.
And through all of that, it's like chess, right? You can set that up
Right.
and think through how everybody's feelings, and it be a win-win, especially when you set up the seller to
Right.
know that, this is a dance, right?
You can educate your seller to understand what the process looks like. And Mr. Seller, you may have to concede on a home warranty. You may have to concede on an inspection or certain items that need to be repaired. So be prepared for that, and just educate them on your strategy to make it happen.
I remember having a panel with new construction listing agents and a couple of builders talking about new construction, and the builders saying that they want to keep the price because people want to get some money off the price because they're building out a neighborhood, and they want the integrity of the pricing in the neighborhood to remain solid. And so they would rather negotiate things like
Right.
fencing, pergolas, blinds, whatever, little things like that they might be willing to give concessions on versus the price.
Right.
So it's a little bit like that when you're talking about how do you, the buyer, how does the buyer feel like they won and the
Right.
seller feels like they won at the end of the day.
Yeah, right. So you want the comparable sales to retain a certain
Right.
level in order to affect other home sales.
Mm-hmm.
And so the buyer can win by receiving other improvements to the property,
Right.
or maybe even a concession on closing costs or points or things like that.
Well, now you mentioned, and you've done a lot of business acquisitions, so negotiating had to come in. That you had high stakes, a lot of probably times where you're like, is this going to come together? And having to stay the course in the negotiations and the longevity of that. And you're having a class coming up on July the 11th, which is this week, and it's about seller strategies, right?
Well, we started a class a couple of weeks ago just to try to educate residential agents who were curious about commercial
Yeah.
and who were somewhat intimidated by the whole idea of commercial. And so our first class dealt with, who are your most likely commercial sellers and how to find a commercial client, and then how to identify commercial buyers. And so that was just an overview. Last week, we talked about actual negotiation strategies with commercial. And this coming week, we're going to be talking about seller financing strategies, because so much in commercial can be done if you understand how to structure financing around the transaction. Many of today's agents are just taught this is the price, go to the bank, get your loan, have a closing, all cash at closing, and that really knocks a whole lot of people out of the market, because there's many buyers who maybe can't qualify for bank financing, or the transaction itself doesn't lend itself to commercial financing because the cash flows are not sufficient, or any number of reasons that seller financing would be more appropriate and make more sense.
Right. I think that would be if you haven't been to one of Jim's roundtables, then definitely check it out. I know you've got some folks that have been very consistent and coming. You've had 2 events, and I love that you came in and you're like, I've got a lot of experience and I'd like to give back. So
Well,
tell us about that.
The primary reason for the roundtable was that we wanted to develop a team of agents here at Keller Williams East Brainerd that could feed each other transactions. In other words, I'm only one person. Although I've lived in Chattanooga many years and know the city very well, it's not possible for me to contact every every seller out there, every property owner. And so we're showing our agents how they can take a main street of Chattanooga main artery, and become an owner of that street, because you know every seller, you know every property owner, you know what's going on with the property, and at some point, those property owners will call you because if they think you're the expert on that street.
Yeah.
And so, whenever I have a shopping center listed for sale, I may not have a buyer, and one of these other agents may have been in contact with someone who owns a shopping center who might be a prospective buyer. You know, one of the things that we talked about in our class about, you know, logical buyers for commercial real estate is, number one, the most logical buyer for commercial real estate is the property owner next door, because most everybody wants to expand their kingdom, their empire, especially when it involves land. And then the other thing is, if it's a income-producing property like a shopping center, a strip center or something, the most logical buyer is someone who owns a similar property, maybe in that part of town, because it's easier for them to manage, and they like that, and they're comfortable with that, and they want to expand their portfolio of properties. And so these are just common sense things that we're teaching, and hopefully we'll have a group that will, you know, feed each other transactions, and we can do some business together.
Well, I know, you know, since it's always been that residential agents are curious about commercial because your license allows you to do so. And I think you're correct in, you know, we really push more training and more education around residential, typically, traditionally. And so getting out there and getting this information is common sense. It sounds like you're just creating commercial geofarms. You're farming a
Right.
geographic area of town for commercial
Well,
opportunities.
and I'm doing it primarily to expand my own sphere of influence, because, you know, I want to, not that I want to build a team working for me, but I want to also benefit them. You know, when I have a property that their buyer can buy, or they have listed something that I have a buyer for, we all help each other.
Well, and that networking piece is really big in the commercial
Right.
space, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, that's how you put things together and find, there's so many different things. And, you know, that business acquisition part, I'm sure, was helpful in you thinking of outside the box. Who do I find
Well,
to acquire this business? Tell us about that.
After 20 years in the business, I was somewhat burnt out on real estate. I had, my first 20 years, I had also delved into selling seller-financed mortgages on the secondary market, and that's something that we're going to cover in our next class.
Okay.
But after 20 years, I thought, you know, there's got to be something better than this. And so I was kind of attracted to business brokerage. And so I actually had a firm here in Chattanooga called Empire Business Brokers. And we were the largest in Chattanooga at the time. We had 12 agents working for us. And we did some, you know, fairly large transactions. I think our largest was like a $29 million transaction.
Wow.
But business brokerage is a specialty area, and it's not as defined as real estate, because, you know, a price of a business is very subjective. Okay?
Right.
Business owners have different motivations than commercial real estate owners. You know, obviously everybody's at some point needs to sell their business. They're going to get old and die someday. So at some point they have to sell their business, especially if their children don't want to take it on. And then you have people need to sell because of health reasons, divorce, partnership issues, any number of reasons can affect the sale of a business. But because of that, those motivations can influence the price, because the more motivated you are, the more you're willing to let it go. I just want out of here, you know. And people experience burnout, and they're tired of it, and they just want to be free. And so knowing how to properly value a business and then structure a transaction that meets the needs of the buyer and seller is very important. Business financing for the sale of a business is not as easy to get as it is for commercial, because much of the value of a business is just intrinsic. There's not hard assets to secure financing.
Right. There's not real property
It's a lot
sometimes.
a lot of goodwill, you know.
Right. Exactly.
And so
that-
goodwill is usually what ends up being financed by the seller. Of
Yeah.
course, you have the ability to get SBA financing, which will finance the unsecured portion as well, but that's very difficult to qualify for. And so understanding negotiation skills is very important, especially in business brokerage.
Oh yeah, because there's a lot of moving parts, whether it's got real property or most of the time it doesn't, possibly.
Right.
And so like even for a real estate agent, they could, in effect, sell their business even though they don't have real property attached, they don't
Right.
have a
Well,
building.
you're selling cash flow.
Yeah.
A business is selling cash flow. And so
Right.
that's what a buyer is buying, cash flow. And on a very small business, usually a buyer is basically buying a job because they've been downsized from a corporate America job, and they need something to do. They've got $100,000 in their 401k, and they're ready to put it down and buy themselves a job.
Okay, well, that's a true story.
Yeah.
That's a true story. So that was something that was very challenging, it sounds like, especially having, you had that many agents underneath you in your
Right.
business, and you really had to be on top of negotiating and being creative and looking at all the pieces. So evaluating business sounds like a strength that you have.
Yeah, it's not that difficult. I went from business brokerage and then specialized even further into ESOPs, which is employee stock ownership plans, which is a government program which gives very good tax benefits to allow you to sell your company to your employees. So that was an area that I got into, and then from there I went on to represent buyers who were making acquisitions for their company and expanding through acquisitions. So it's been a very interesting ride.
And so now here you are. Tell us,
Well,
in Chattanooga.
I moved back to Chattanooga. I was living in Florida for many years. I moved back to Chattanooga because my parents recently turned 90 years old. They're very in good health.
That's a blessing.
But I felt my sister should have some help with them, so I moved
Yeah.
back here. And here I am in Chattanooga. What do? I had just sold my businesses. And so I realized, well, I've got these real estate licenses that I've, kept all these years. And so actually, I live nearby here, and I just walked in the door one day, and I happened to run into Jay Craig, who I've known from 20-something years ago.
That's fun.
And so it's been a great relationship.
Yeah. And both of you are into music, and that's how you knew
Right.
each other,
Yeah,
right?
we knew
From
each
your
other
music
church,
past,
and
right?
So we're attending the same church now. And
Nice.
I really enjoy seeing him.
Well, I love that. Jay always says, "Some will, some want, anyone can."
Right.
Some want to know more information about commercial, about a different part of the business. Some will show up and be fed that and learn that and grow that, and anyone can do that. It sounds like your group settings are open to everyone that wants to come in and
Right.
contribute, right? Contribute and
Right.
learn from your experience
Right.
of 45 years and all of those things. Such a value piece for the agents that come in and take part of that,
Right.
for sure. What do you think the biggest challenges for agents are for agents right now in this market?
I think that much of our real estate education is centered on, this is the way to do things. It's always been done this way, and if you do this, follow these steps, you'll be successful. And it negates all of the other potential ways to do things. One of the things that kept me away from residential for many years, especially in the beginning, was all of the detail and paperwork involved. I'm not a very big detail person. And what I enjoy about commercial is that there's one form to get a listing, that's it. And so it's a whole lot simpler to me.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
So, agents nowadays need to learn how to think outside the box. They need to look at all the options available to them. Yeah, it'd be great if everybody said, okay, I'll pay that price and here's the cash. Well, it's not that easy. We navigate in waters that have all kinds of problems. And so knowing how to structure a transaction and knowing having at your disposal the tools necessary to adapt to the changing, transaction as it happens is very important.
So it sounds like, because of some of the things you've already said, in your experience, because you've had time on task over time with all the things you've gone through, your brain is wired as a habit to go, okay, this, and this. Like I imagine you run things through a filter of looking at it from different angles and different opportunities, just naturally.
Yeah, I tend to look at all the other possibilities that are not being considered.
Okay.
And
Tell us about that. Like, I want to know when you sit down, like how do you think through something like a residential transaction that's in a stall mode? Like, what does that look like?
Well, you could find out, why is it in a stall mode? What does the seller need, and what is not being introduced that would solve the problem? And, find out what is the component that would take it out of stall mode, and then either work with this buyer to make it happen or find another buyer who can make that happen. It's as simple as just listening to the parties and finding out what needs to happen to make it work. I don't know how to say it any more clearly than that. It's basically problem solving, which is what we teach in the commercial side as well. The commercial real estate is all about solving someone's problem, whether they need to sell their business because their business is expanding, they've outgrown their property, they have financing issues, they have, the business is going down, they can't afford it anymore. It's solving a problem. And in many sense, the residential is also solving a problem. The seller needs to move for whatever reason. The buyer needs to upgrade for whatever reason. And you're just being a matchmaker, really. I feel that real estate especially is a matchmaker business. You're trying to match this seller with this buyer. And, we teach our commercial agents to go out there and find as many properties as you can. This property owner may not be a seller, but he may be a buyer. He's usually one or the other, because either they need to get rid of something or they're wanting to increase. And so you have a collection of sellers over here and a collection of buyers over here, and then it's just a point where you match them up with each other. This one might not be for this one, but it might work for that one over there. And so what we're trying to do in our class is to have a bigger pool of buyers and sellers that we can match make between ourselves.
Well, that makes sense. That makes sense to go out there and find the most that you can, and then move the pieces around the board to those that make it to make the match for sure. Well, I appreciate you hanging out with me today, especially because I wanted our agents that possibly, the ones that come in may have already met you. They might have seen you at a team meeting, but there are a lot of our agents out there that didn't know about Jim West. And now we have a couple of new agents, new to KW, but not new to the business, that really love commercial and to join Jeff Dodson. So we're glad that you're here, and love that your heart of wanting to help agents win in the commercial space and think strategically, and also how that can spill over into the residential world. So even if someone hasn't thought about commercial, they could definitely come to the class, right?
Because some of the concepts we're teaching about negotiations and problem solving also apply to residential. So
exactly, right? So if you're out there, because you might spark some interest or some knowledge where someone didn't realize that they might want to do commercial business, and then they find out more and find that they do want to dip their toe into that.
Right, and this coming Friday on July the 11th at 11 a.m. right here, we're going to have a class that talks about all kinds of seller financing strategies, and these are principles that apply to residential or commercial. If you don't understand seller finance or how to calculate payments or yields or all those kinds of things, come and join us at Friday the 11th.
Yeah, let's do that. And I'm going to make sure that it's on our online calendar for you guys to RSVP. And that way we'll know, you've got your regulars that are attending that have already RSVP space. And if you would like to attend, then just let us know so we can make sure we have adequate space for you. I definitely think it's worth your time to check out some of these resources to improve your knowledge around helping sellers with financing, or buyers. The more people that we have with that knowledge, the more transactions we can keep together or hold together or piece together as a group, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Jim. Happy Monday. I appreciate you being on here. You're a wealth of knowledge, and we're glad to have you in our pond and our family here.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Y'all go out and get business this week.